Welcome to Wild Connection, the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jennifer Verdelin. I'm a scientist and author that studies animal behavior. I'm passionate about animals and exploring the complexity of their lives, their intelligence, relationships, families, social connections, and emotions. I also love helping people reconnect with nature to live better lives. This podcast is about you, other animals, and how we're all connected in this wild and crazy thing called life. Hey everybody, welcome back to Wild Connection. I'm Dr. Jennifer Verdelin, and today's guest needs little introduction, but I'm going to give you one anyway. Sy Montgomery is a best-selling author, naturalist, and explorer of animal minds and hearts. With over 30 books, from The Soul of an Octopus to How to Be a Good Creature, Sy invites us to see the world through the eyes of others. Today, we're going to talk about her journey as a writer, what chickens know, and how we can all live a little bit more compassionately. Welcome to the show.
I'm so thrilled to join you. This is great.
I am beyond excited. I think one of my favorite books of yours is The Good Pig.
Oh, my big boy.
Yeah. And
he used to break out of his pen and go visiting people. And now he's in spirit form. He's visited people all around the world through the book.
And that's one of the things I really admire about your writing is how you tell the stories of the individual lives of individual animals. And I'm curious kind of where this started for you. How did you, get on this journey?
Well, I think most of us as children have a natural connection with animals. I think that makes sense considering until about 10 minutes ago, evolutionarily speaking, we were all hunter-gatherers. And if you didn't pay attention to the natural world, something came and ate you, or you couldn't find the tubers. So before I could speak, before I could walk, I'm told that I was drawn to animals. And my parents took me to the zoo when I was a toddler. This was in Germany where I was born. And, toddlers wriggle free of their parents' hands. And the next time they saw me, I was in the hippo pen.
Oh, geez.
So I always felt like they were my people, And when I was little and began to speak and think, I realized I had this existential problem. And my parents wanted me desperately to be their little girl, but I had no interest in this at all because, as I announced to them, I was really a horse. So my mother took me to the pediatrician who explained I would grow out of it, which I did when I realized I was actually a dog. My parents, my problem was everyone wanted me to be something that I didn't want to be. What I wanted to be was a dog, and there was no one to teach me. But then they got me Molly, a Scottish Terrier puppy, who, although she was younger than I chronologically, she, dogs mature faster than human beings. And very quickly, she became my older sister who would teach me everything. And basically what I wanted to do with my life as a little girl was be her apprentice and have her show me the secrets of all of the animals who she could see and she could smell and she could hear, but I could not. And essentially that's what I've done in my career is followed in her paw print.
That is so powerful. And I relate to that in a different way. I never thought of myself as this animal or that animal, but I've always felt like other animals had something to teach me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me one bit, Jennifer. Because you're such a student of animals, literally, as an ethologist.
Yeah.
And I write about this in How to Be a Good Creature. There's a saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Yeah.
And for us, sometimes the teacher was the teacher in the classroom or the professor, but sometimes, it was a gorilla or it was a snake or a tarantula or an octopus or a dog or a cat or a pig or a grasshopper.
Yeah. And I'm still always looking at other animals. Every time I see them, if I can spend any time with them, whether I'm doing a formal study or not, I'm always thinking about what they're doing, how they're handling life, and what I can learn from that. And I sort of have faced a similar challenge, even in my adult life and professional life, which I'm curious to know if you've experienced this. But, as a student, let's say, of animal behavior from the animals directly, I have not been attached to studying one particular animal. I keep shifting. Prairie dogs and then lemurs and now mountain gorillas, which of course is a dream come true, because if I was ever anything, it was going to be a mountain gorilla. But
yeah, we almost all of us are almost mountain. We're 98% mountain gorilla anyway, right?
Very true. I think they're ahead of us in that game of life a little bit, from what I've observed. But we have a lot to learn. But there's been a lot of pressure, right, to focus on one specific species or one specific question. And I don't find that very satisfying, because I have this inherent curiosity and desire to learn from a lot of different animals and share that with people. So I'm wondering, you've written over 30 books, and from octopuses to turtles to pigs. And now we will talk about chickens, but have you felt any pressure to shift the way you write about all of these different creatures and their lives?
Well, unlike you, I don't have the academic pressure. I'm not associated with any academy at all. Most writers also teach. Most writers have a day job, but I do not, and neither does my husband. We are so working without a net. But while working without a net, the great thing is nobody tells you what to do.
Yeah,
your boss can't fire you because it's you. So I can do whatever I want. And I suppose there is some pressure as a writer to actually switch, because there might be a limit to I probably could not write and sell 38 books on octopuses, although I have written like 4 or 5 books on octopuses. Probably I could write 38 books on dogs. There might be a market for that. But I find that intellectually and spiritually, the universe finds me often the next creature who's going to come into my life. Sometimes you're making a very conscious choice. And with my first book, that was intentionally on the great apes, the chimpanzees, orangutans, and gorillas, for a very specific reason. And I think that's one of the reasons that you and I feel so connected, Jennifer.
Yes.
I'm looking at as we speak, I'm looking at the gorgeous portrait of Mariah, which is your screensaver. And I am looking at pictures of mountain gorillas I visited in the 80s on my desk. So I felt like, here's our closest relatives, and I wanted to write this book as an act of homage to the 3 women, Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey, and Biruta Galdikas, who influenced me as a young woman. And I wanted to write not a biography of their lives, but a biography of their relationships with their study animals, which were key to their understanding them. In deciding the next book to do, sometimes you're making a decision. For my next book, I wanted to write about our relationship with predators, because that's often troubled. And I wrote about tigers, man-eating tigers in Sunderban. But other times, I'd been waiting for years and years and years before 2011, when I decided to write about consciousness. And I picked octopuses as my main teacher about what consciousness is. I would not have been ready to write that book until 2011. It didn't come out till 2015. And I don't think people would have been ready to read what I wrote till 2015.
Yeah.
So, I kind of feel like everything kind of conspires to help me decide what I'm doing next. And I feel very supported, even though my husband and I are technically working without a net in so many ways. I feel that there's a whole network of animals, searchers, and poets and visionaries and friends I haven't met yet who are already supporting me, guiding me this way.
Well, there's a lot that resonates with me personally with the things that you've just said, both as now a researcher studying great apes and as a writer. So I remember when I first started this project on the mountain gorillas in Uganda, Diane Fossey did also work in Uganda, even though most of her research was in Rwanda. And there was a moment I was in the forest and there were the gorillas like in the open area, just doing their gorilla life. And I just had this moment of like, I can't believe I'm walking in the same forest as somebody, I read all of those books. I was heavily influenced as a young woman by those very same three women who were changing the world in so many ways. And there was this moment where I just had to stop and go, wow, I'm walking the same forest. These are different gorillas.
Scientific sisterhood.
Yeah.
It's just wonderful. That's just so great. And boy, I mean, Diane did not have an easy time of it and fled Uganda, as you know.
Yeah.
I take it it's much easier to work there now.
It is. There's different challenges, right? And I've been tested in different ways that I couldn't have imagined and that I wouldn't have been ready for 25 years ago. So I think timing, which circles me back to kind of what you were saying about how you choose your next book or what story comes to you next. I can relate to this also as a writer. And sometimes the moment passes. I have an idea, I have a book proposal, I've put in all of the effort and the moment passes. It's just not time. The timing isn't right. And then I have the books that I'm sitting on that are in my head and they're sitting there and maybe they'll come to life one day, maybe they won't. But I think that I get that spark, that creative idea from an interaction with another species or a small snippet of a story that I read somewhere and I think, oh, but your writing has also inspired me to shift how I tell stories. And so I'm curious how your storytelling has changed over time through all of these books.
Well, when I started writing, I was trained as a journalist, and you would keep the perpendicular pronoun out of your work. You did not use the word I.
Yeah.
It wasn't about the writer. And even if you were present, which I was, I went to all the study sites where the women had worked. I was writing about with my first book, but I never in the first edition of that book used the word I, even though I was definitely experiencing it. You would say what was happening, but you wouldn't tell the reader, how did you know it? They would not know that you were necessarily there. For all they knew, you'd just been a very skilled interviewer or had seen video. So one of the big changes that has happened is that there is now a hunger for the writer to reveal themselves in their work. And at first, I really balked about that because it's not about me. I'm the least interesting one in the whole thing, But when I did my first memoir, The Good Pig, my brilliant editor, Susanna Porter at Random House Books, said, "You've got to put yourself in here." I was like, oh, no. But the way I came to see it, and this was with help from another memoirist who's a dear friend of mine, Brenda Peterson, who's written a ton of great books. My body, my senses, my experience belonged in there, in that I was the setting for the jewel that was Christopher's life. So the memoir was not about me. It was about my life with Christopher Hogwood, this wonderful pig who grew to 750 pounds, lived for 14 years, and got write-in votes at every election in our town. He was so beloved. He was a great big Buddha master. And to have written it without putting myself in there and showing how he changed me would not have shown his brilliance the greatest advantage. So in that way, I've put more of myself in there. And even so, the editors are always wanting more and I'm wanting less, but at least they've gotten me to show my hand a little bit in there.
Well, and I think you're right. It really, you can't feel the impact of the lives of these animals if you're not there, right, in the story. And so, and what I love is you also have written about other animals that many people don't have a high regard or any kind of strong feeling one way or another, from pigs to the octopus, turtles, and now chickens. And I love chickens. And I think they're so fascinating. And I really think they are underestimated. And so one of the things that I really appreciate that you bring to people is the complexity of the lives and the minds and the hearts and the spirits of these other animals. And so can we talk about chickens? What do they know?
They know a lot, and they know stuff we don't know. And it's been a joy to bring forward the brilliance of these animals, that they're very emotional. They're quite smart. They have excellent memories. They can recognize like 100 different faces. They recognize individual human faces easily. And we know they recognize faces the same way we look at the face. I mean, you can sometimes see the gestalt of your like best friend or something, even from the back. But most people, unless you know them very well, you need to look at their face. We do know from experiments that chickens are looking at the face, and that's the most important thing. So in that way, their intelligence is like ours. They also have terrific spatial memories and spatial intelligence, which I don't. I am lost all the time. It's pathetic. When I was a little girl, well, not itty bitty. This was like I was in junior high school, I think, or fixing to be. We moved to another place, and I literally got lost in our own backyard. And it wasn't like the 50-acre backyard. It was like a half-acre lot. But I had failed to look at what the house looked like from the back. So I turned around. And what the heck was this house? Anyway, chickens, not so. You can put chickens into a new place and they'll have it mapped out pronto.
Right.
Also, they have a terrific genius for relationships. And this is something, it's central to chickens. We think about the pecking order and we make it out to be this kind of nasty, mean. It's not about pecking. It's about order. And knowing who's who and who's your friend, who's your closest friend. And often there's not much pecking at all. My flock, which culturally persisted over the course of 2 decades, although very few chickens live that long, but the culture of that flock kept going without interruption for 2 decades. My ladies were totally calm, laid back, mostly feminist utopia, although we did have a few roosters. They got along great. They didn't peck each other all the time. They didn't tear each other's feathers out. And I think this is something people don't recognize. They think chickens, first of all, you look up chickens just on the internet, and you're just as likely to get recipes as you are to get information about a living, thinking, feeling animal with memories and an ability to project their thoughts into the future. You don't understand from all the garbage out there that they're emotional creatures who value their relationships above all.
Well, it's interesting when I think about those negative stereotypes that people have about chickens. I'm wondering if the the nature that people ascribe to them is because of how they've been kept or housed in really stressful conditions. Because we know that if you are not given enough space or resources or the ability to be your authentic self behaviorally, mentally, emotionally, all kinds of maladaptations come up, or behaviors that aren't serving you well. We see that in human society. So why wouldn't we see it in chicken society?
Gosh, so right you are. I was sitting next to a nice man on a plane years ago, and we were talking about chickens. And he told me, oh, they're just dirty, stupid, nasty creatures. And I said, how do you get that impression? It turned out he'd worked on one of these factory farms,
Right.
which is like a prison camp.
Mm-hmm.
And my father was a survivor of the Bataan Death March and years in a prison camp. And I can tell you that you are exactly right. In those conditions, even the smartest, kindest, best educated of people can shut down and don't show their true selves. It is like they're brain damaged. And of course, the other thing that I think makes people underestimate chickens is that we eat them and we feel better about eating them if we think that they are just feathered vegetables that run around after their heads cut off. And I think running around after your head's cut off is kind of a cool talent. I don't see why that makes them sound stupid. I think that's really like super cool. I wish I could run around after my head was cut off. That would freak a lot of people out and it would be highly entertaining to watch, which I suppose you could from your severed head lying on the ground. But chickens... I know that. Talk to a biologist and eventually you'll talk about something icky, right? But chickens are not like that at all. And once we change our understanding, I think the whole world is far richer and incandescent with life, really, than we think when we're blinded by these ideas that only humans think and feel and know. If you understand evolution, and even if you read all the creation stories through every human culture, you will get the same message that we are all related. We are related genetically. And why should the ability to think be only in one species? Think how helpful it is for us to think and to learn and to project what we have learned into the future to help us. It's a very adaptive trait. So chickens, boy, do they pay attention. When that fox comes to visit the hen house, they know all about foxes after that. They remember where they were when that fox attacked. They remember, goodness, my dog wants to be on the show. I had mentioned to you earlier, there's a Doberman who goes past around this time every morning. It's a Doberman Dane cross. And Thurber always feels that he has to say hello.
Well, hello. What is her name?
One of them is named Bean, and the other one is a full Dane.
Well, it's so interesting, right? Because I think many people have no trouble extending the idea that their dog or their cat has a personality and that different dogs have different personalities, especially if they have multiple animals in the household. And I think that what's been very interesting is sort of this resistance to the idea, not only that other animals think complex thoughts, that they have their own hopes, dreams, desires, ambitions for the day, maybe for the week, maybe for next year, but that they have a personality. And so one of the areas of research that I've focused on a lot is personality. And of course, I've bumped up to other scientists who insist on calling it behavioral syndromes, like it's an illness. In other species, it's a syndrome. It's not. It's a personality. But they resist it because it has the word person in it. And so I'm curious, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about some of the differences in personality that you have seen in your chickens.
Oh, wow. Yeah. First, I'd like to point out that the word person comes from the word persona, which means mask, essentially mask of God.
Oh,
So we are all persons, not just human beings. And I think it's often we want to exclude others as we have, people with different colored skin, women. We want to exclude them from the circle of rights and responsibilities that we have towards others. It makes our lives, I think many people think it makes us more powerful, but really it makes us impoverished. It's as if you only ate one food or only listened to one song your whole life. Not having friends who are other species is just impoverishing. But chicken personalities are quite striking. One chicken who actually this was not my chicken. This is a chicken who belonged to a woman who wrote a book called How to Speak Chicken. Her name is Melissa, and she had a chicken named Tilly who made up a name for her. And I was with her when we realized that's what that sound was. Tilly only said this one thing when Melissa was around. And she knew that, like me, a lot of people who keep chickens have baby monitors so you can listen to what your chickens are saying. And who knows what they're talking about, but she knew that Tilly only said this when she was approaching. And it sounded sort of like a trumpet announcing a queen. It was like, ba, 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 like that. And we now know that lots of animals do have names for themselves and for others, as dolphins have signature whistles, for example, and I believe your prairie dogs have lots of words for different stuff, including like "there goes the guy in the red hat carrying a gun."
yes.
They lots of animals, crows, for example, parrots. A number of parrots have names for their clan, and if you don't say your name right, you get kicked out of the nest. It's almost like the password. But some chickens are shy. Some chickens are bold. Chickens have best friends who they sleep next to. We had a chicken named Pickles who had some kind of a brain defect when she was little, and she was the lowest on the totem pole, but she was happy there because everyone else kind of took care of her and looked after her. She didn't need to be the top chicken.
Right.
Not everyone has to be the top chicken. Not everyone wants to be the top chicken. And if everyone does, what a mess you have.
For sure.
But Pickles was the most gentle, dear bird, and the little girls next door used to carry her around under their sweater, and she loved to be cuddled. There was a chicken who lived across the street, actually a rooster. There's a rooster rescue across the street from me. And people think that roosters are mean and that they're going to attack you. And sometimes they do attack you in trying to protect their flock. But the folks across the street have figured out that you can tame even the most rambunctious rooster. And they often become the greatest gentlemen ever. They had a rooster named Carlos who just loved hugs. And he knew how to open the door to the house. He would come in the house and he'd run up the stairs. He craved human company. And there was another rooster who, and I don't think this was Carlos, actually. I think this was a different one, who used to bring my neighbor little trinkets as gifts, usually shiny things, and just deposit them. And crows do this too. Crows will bring special things to their special friends.
Yeah.
I heard of another chicken who would go into her favorite person's house, a little boy, and lay her egg on his pillow every day.
Wow.
It was a gift. And they're just as distinctive as we are. The only thing is that we don't always watch them to learn of this. But increasingly, people are keeping chickens at home. and they all report the same thing. They know which ones are super smart. They know which ones are crabby. Someone I knew at a talk, someone came up to me and told me that her rooster, unlike most roosters who are great gentlemen, he would give the special food call that they do when they find something really delicious and they call their flock of ladies over.
Yeah.
And they usually step back and allow their ladies to enjoy the special food. But he would give the food call when there was nothing.
Yeah.
The ladies would come running, and then he would jump on their backs and copulate with them. They figured that out pretty fast.
They did. And in fact, that's one of the intro portions of my wild connection. What other animals teach us about mating and dating, because I thought to myself, I'm failing miserably in my dating life, but even chickens, they don't try to take the rooster to therapy when he gives the fake food call. If they show up and there's no food, they don't stay. And so I thought, well, how is it that a chicken can understand things better than I can? And maybe I need to pay more attention to hens because, So
very discerning.
Yes. This fake food call business inspired my first book.
Oh my gosh, that is so fabulous.
Yeah.
I'd actually never heard of it before. I talked to this reader who shared at a talk that I thought that they were all telling the truth. But, I'm lucky I found my husband when I was a teenager. I found him in college because there's a lot of crummy guys out there that I never had to mess with because I found Howard.
You found your rooster early.
Call rooster guy.
Well, I think it's so interesting because I went to Key West recently and I did not know that they just have a plethora of chickens. And you can't mess with these chickens. You can't hurt them. Nobody would, I don't think, but they're very revered. I don't know when this happened, but it was fantastic. And I remember visiting the graveyard and this rooster gave that food call and he did have something because all of the ladies ran over and then and just like you said, as a polite gentleman, stepped back and allowed them to enjoy. And I remember going, oh, so there's a high quality rooster. He actually had the food. And, but I really loved that experience in Key West with so many hens and chicks and roosters running around, just living in the city side by side with everybody else. And I'm wondering, you've written about so many different species. What do you think are some of the most important lessons you've taken from all of these other animals?
Well, one was something Christopher Hogwood taught me, our pig. I got him when I was in my early 30s. He was a sick little runt. He was half the size of the other runts at this piggery that friends of ours owned. And at the time, my father was dying of cancer. Even though I had been disowned by my family, and I'm an only child, so that was a big thing for my parents to cut their only child out of their lives. Nonetheless, as soon as I found out my father was sick, I kept flying down to take care of him. Mm-hmm. They had disowned me for getting married to someone they didn't approve of. But I learned several things from Chris. And one was, even though my love could not heal my dying father, who I still loved him so much, my love could heal Christopher Hogwood and bring him back to life. He had a touch of every disease in the barn. And being so runty, he could never get near his mother's milk or any of the food. So love does have power. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I learned from him is that love is not just genetic. Family is made out of love, but it's not limited to genes. Family is much bigger than that. So my family, I was kicked out of the only people genetically related to me. I was kicked out of that family. But I had a fabulous family here in New Hampshire. One of them just happened to have a flexible nose disc and a curly tail. And, others had feathers and others had scales and others had fur. But family can be much bigger than that. Our family included the little girls who lived next door and who helped me care for Christopher Hogwood. Our family included their mom, whose own family had been broken up due to a really nasty divorce. So Christopher Hogwood's the one who taught me about what family really means. And he also taught me, sometimes pigs are so smart, and they're thought to be as smart as dogs, although comparing intelligences is kind of weird because we just value our own intelligence and we look at the intelligences that are most like our own to appreciate. But he would open his own door and let himself out of his pen and run all over the place. So I spent a lot of time chasing a pig. And one day he got out, and I had actually let him out, but usually I could lead him back to his pen with delicious slops. But unbeknownst to me, people used to come and feed him all the time. Little kids would feed him their school lunch, and people would come by and give their, freezer burned ice cream to him. And our neighbor had just given him a ton of apples. So he was not hungry, and he wouldn't follow me back to his pen. So what we had to do that day, he was a 750-pound pig. I couldn't pick him up and move him. I couldn't pull him.
Right.
So I just followed him around until he felt like lying down under an apple tree on a summer sunny day. And I just spent that afternoon lying with my pig under the apple tree, petting his belly. And I'll remember that for the rest of my life. I will not remember the emails I wasn't doing or the phone calls I wasn't answering. I'll remember what it felt like, be stroking his belly and the smell of those ripening apples and the feel of the sun on my skin. That's the thing I'll remember. So he taught me about comfort and joy.
Yeah.
And other animals have taught me so many other things. Molly really helped show me what I wanted to do with my life. 3 emus who I studied in Australia in my 20s. I lived in the outback tent for 6 months. They taught me how to live my life, how to do a study of wild animals and write about it. An ermine who killed one of my chickens on Christmas morning taught me how great forgiveness feels. And I could just go on and on and on. They've been my greatest teachers and my closest friends always.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I thought about what you said about family, and I want to circle back to that in a moment. But I was thinking for myself, when I was thinking about asking you this question, of course, I had to reflect and go, what about me? And for me, I think one big lesson is to be present. And it's something like what you were sharing about being under the apple tree, right? Being in that moment with your pig under the apple tree. And so being present, animals are, to me, other animals are often quite present. I rarely see them fretting about the future. They're just in that moment. That doesn't mean they don't plan and they don't have thoughts about what they want to do next. But I see them fully present.
Yes, and they are immersed in the information coming from their senses.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when we we like cut off our senses, we're probably experiencing stuff, but not consciously.
Yeah.
But when's the last time most people sat in their office and could describe what it smelled like in there? And who stops and thinks of the feel of the air on their skin? it's lovely to bask in our own senses sometimes, and animals are doing that all the time.
That's right. And that's what motivated me actually to have a new course out on Audible called Reconnect with Nature, and then a workbook that goes along with it, because this disconnection from yourself, from others, from other animals, just from exactly that. Could you describe the sensations that you're feeling? And we're reacting or responding constantly to this information, but we don't even know what we're responding to because we're not present. And the other thing that you mentioned about learning, for me, I think forgiveness. I've learned from animals, the other animals, the power of forgiveness, because I think, and this, my own cat, Buttons, or as I like to have called him, Señor Antonio Botones Gatos. He had a fancy, long-lived life. His book is coming, but I made mistakes in certain ways. I remember I got really mad at him, and I know I scared him when I got really mad, and he forgave me like 15 minutes later, and
Yeah.
it was over, and it was like, okay. And so I know some animals do hold grudges, and I think it depends on the severity of the offense, which is fair. And if the other thing they've taught me is if someone is dangerous, right, then you avoid that individual.
Yes.
You don't go tapping it on the shoulder going, but why? But why? You just accept,
get away. I know.
get
They have so much
away.
sense.
And so I, like you, I have all of these lessons from different animals. And I think that I love how you bring those lessons to life in your writing. And I know that we are bumping up on almost the end of time. And so I wanted to kind of ask if this is a strange question, maybe a bit of a fantasy question, but like, if you could spend the next few months with a particular species who you haven't had time to get to know, is there one that jumps out at you that you really just wish you could? And why?
Oh my gosh. You could almost pick a species at random, really. I mean, I would love to hang out with polar bears. I would love to hang out with wolves. I'm really interested in giant anteaters. They live in Brazil's Pantanal, and I actually know the guy studying these guys. They're so cool. Also tamanduas, who are the smaller ones. They're so cute. Gosh, I mean, giraffes and bison and hippos and rattels and camels and penguins and gosh, and then everybody in the sea. I would love to get to know your prairie dogs. They are so fascinating.
They are, and they are so incredible, and it was something you said also about, personality differences. And I thought about this when I've seen differences in personality in the prairie dogs, of course. And I always thought that I wondered if their social unit that they're part of, like the group that they're part of, even though many groups live on a colony, they have their own social groups. And
like us. Yeah.
Exactly. And I always thought to myself, well, because I studied social networks in the prairie dogs, and some were really big connectors between groups, and some were super connected within the group, and some were both. And I thought to myself, well, I wonder if I move from this group, if I'm a prairie dog and I'm a really bold, connecting individual, and I move to this group, do I express the same, dynamic there? Because, we can express different parts of our personality depending on the social group that we're in. We don't always act the same. And I liked your in teaching me that person comes from persona, which means mask. And our personalities, we have many, many masks. And I thought to myself, well, maybe there's this balance of personality types that makes a particular social group work really well. And if you have too many leaders, then it's, like you said, a hot mess. And if you have nobody that wants to be in charge, then it's also a hot mess. And so is there a balance of a flow of personality types as individuals move from one group to another? And I love prairie dogs. If I want to spend a vacation, I would say to myself, where did I want to go on vacation? I just want to put a chair down and find a prairie dog colony and hang out, because it's a hopping place. And after 20 years of studying prairie dogs, a few years ago, saw something new.
Wow, tell us.
Oh, well, it was exciting. It was this particular colony, the way they handled a rattlesnake. And they did this like little dance, patting the ground, and one prairie dog at a time, not all of the prairie dogs, but wherever the snake was, there was a prairie dog that would start this behavior of sticking their neck out and sniffing, and then patting the ground, and then scratching their back leg. And then all of a sudden the snake would move. And I didn't have enough incidences of this to show that the snake was responding to the behaviors of the prairie dogs, even though I know that that's true. I couldn't publish that in a scientific paper. But the prairie dogs were essentially communicating to the snake, time to go. And rattlesnakes, most people don't realize this, but they don't want to be found. They don't.
No. Yeah.
They don't want to be seen. And so they're not aggressive. They're actually quite passive. And so the prairie dogs, it was 6 events that I saw 6 different times doing the same thing, that basically were like, it's time to go. And then escorting the snake, so walking adjacent to the snake till it left their particular territory. And there were, different personalities of those prairie dogs. One of them just had to whack that snake on the tail after.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, you can hear my audio going, no, baby, don't do it. Don't do it, baby.
Do rattlesnakes eat prairie dogs? You would think that they do.
They do. They typically eat young prairie dogs, although there was an adult. So it's quite dangerous activity for a prairie dog to take on a rattlesnake.
Yes, but the rattlesnake now knows the prairie dog has seen it.
Well, correct. And it's not that, and typically rattlesnakes can't manage an adult prairie dog, right? They weigh maybe 2.5 pounds. They're kind of big. So that doesn't mean if you don't, if you provoke a rattlesnake enough, it'll strike. And but they want to conserve their energy and their, venom for food. They don't really want to use it in an argument. That's not right. That's not helpful to them. So I never saw in those 6 incidences the rattlesnake actually make contact in striking, even though there was a prairie dog less than like 5 inches away from the head of this rattlesnake. However, what caught my attention the first day was this bloated prairie dog on the edge of a burrow, and another prairie dog doing that behavior of sniffing and ground patting with the front feet. And I didn't know what had happened to this prairie dog. And then I saw a rattlesnake, probably the same one that I observed over the next few days, attempting to eat it, but it couldn't get its mouth around the body. And so I that's what made me go, oh, I'm glad I chose to come here on vacation. And so I filmed all of it because I knew no one would believe me. And then I ended up writing a paper about it. But
Wow.
I even called like Konslobodchikov, who was my
Yes.
master's advisor. I called him because he's studied prairie dogs longer than me. And I was like, have you ever seen this? I was describing it to him. He's like, I have never seen that.
That is
And
so fascinating.
yeah,
And
so
it could be a cultural artifact of the
exactly.
community you were studying,
That's
which is
exactly
why
it.
he may not have seen it. Yeah. They
That's
may have
exactly
that
it.
habit.
Well,
Yeah.
and so I think, and then young ones were watching this all unfold. And so, of course, I think that there's cultural ways of dealing with different environments that are transmitted across families if you grow up in that colony, because we know their dialects are different. And
Right.
so why wouldn't their behaviors and how they handle different situations? So I 100% agree with you that it's a cultural artifact, that those prairie dogs at that colony, that is how they deal with rattlesnakes.
That's so cool.
It was.
Oh.
It was. Now, I hate to have to end this conversation because it's just such an honor and a joy to talk to you and hear about all of the different animals that you have encountered, that you've learned from, and that you've written about. I hope everybody gets all of your books, including the ones you have for children. But your latest one is What a Chicken Knows. And so thank you so much, Sy, for being on the show. It's just such an honor.
Jennifer, it's been a total pleasure. Thank you so much.
What a joy it was to talk with Sy Montgomery, a writer who not only observes animals, but truly listens to them. Whether it's an octopus, a pig, or a backyard chicken, Sy reminds us that every creature has something to teach us, if we're willing to slow down and pay attention. If you were inspired by today's conversation, I've created a free downloadable discussion guide to help you reflect, journal, or even host a conversation with your own community. You can grab it at my website, www.jenniferverdelin.com/blog, or find it in the episode description. And if you're curious about the discussion we had on prairie dogs and their response to rattlesnakes, don't forget to check out the YouTube video where I describe that study and how they use complex behaviors to not only warn each other of danger, but to get rid of the danger when it's on their territory. Next time, we're shifting from the animal world to the landscapes we all share. I'll be speaking with author Robert McFarlane about his latest book, Is a River Alive? And it's a combination of stories, culture, and ecology, the ecology of rivers in particular, and how we're all connected. It's poetic, it's powerful, and you won't want to miss it. Until then, stay curious, stay connected, and remember, nature is always speaking to us. The question is, are we listening?